Mondays with Mike. Can we talk about Trump's big beautiful bill?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's got a bunch of components. The big one is extending all the tax cuts that were already in place for the very wealthy. Probably the most annoying aspect of it is that they're lying about not doing cuts to Medicaid. Trump said, "Oh, I'm not going to do cuts to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid." But the bill definitely does cuts to Medicaid. It's imposing huge work requirements for able bodied adults between the ages of 18 and 64 that they have to be working, volunteering, or in school, or they're going to lose access to Medicaid. And they also impose really strict limits on how long you can be on Medicaid. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on in there. I listened to Mike Johnson's interviews on CNN and on Face the Nation and all the Sunday shows that he gave interviews on. And there's this moral test or something for people receiving Medicaid. People don't get to receive it if they're not the very poorest of the poor. 100% is cruel, right? That they're imposing cuts on the very poorest in the country in order to give more wealth back to those who are the very richest in the country. It's all laid out in the legislation. There was one tiny little line in the legislation that they're trying to do an end run around court orders by creating this convoluted language about how court orders can't be enforced against people unless they have a security with the court, unless they've given money to the court. It's this really convoluted language. That one, I think people are going to sue for that one. It's trying to put way more power in the hands of the president and Congress to just ignore court orders. And so that one, I think there's going to be some efforts in the reconciliation to just not have that. Remember that House bills are always just like the opening argument because the Senate has to vote on it and then they have reconciliation. So a lot of this stuff's going to get hashed out. Senators have different political pressures than House members do because they have greater constituencies, right? They have statewide constituencies. You're going to see senators from some of these states go, no way. I'm not going to have a third of my constituents or half of my constituents or whatever the number is that are on Medicaid or Medicare just lose access to their health care. That's one aspect that I noticed for this bill is it's huge, right? It's a very big bill, but it's cruel. And it's cruel in ways we haven't seen before, that they want to cut SNAP, they want to cut Medicaid in really large numbers, hundreds of billions of dollars. If it goes through, it's going to make the country hungrier and also have less access to healthcare. The main issue here is that this goes back to the Trump administration at least misleading the electorate when they said that they weren't going to do any cuts to Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security at all. When you cut money from these programs, you are doing cuts to Medicaid. Any change that effectively results in less people participating is effectively a cut, right? Because if you have less people who qualify, that means less money gets appropriated to help the remaining pool. That's just the way that goes. The big, beautiful bill definitely is cruel. There's no question about that. There used to be this sort of agreement or at least understanding between on a bipartisan basis that Medicaid is meant to go towards those who need it, that SNAP cuts don't harm just the recipients of SNAP. It's also SNAP is a subsidy for farmers, right, to ensure that they have a market for their food. It is actually really strange that the Republicans want to cut any amount of money that goes towards SNAP because SNAP is not money to people. It's a subsidy paid to farmers. And so that's where it's actually quite confusing because the tariffs and the changes in the trade war and all that have hurt farmers a great deal. And this is just going to make it even worse for farmers that they're losing potentially billions of dollars of subsidies that they were getting from SNAP.
I see. So, what do you think is the likelihood that this bill does not pass the Senate? Because he doesn't have too much leeway.
I think some version of it's going to pass, that there's enough political pressure to get them to comply. Also, they're trying to use reconciliation again instead of allowing for a filibuster. They don't need as many senators as they otherwise would need. They don't need any Democratic senators at all if they want to. So it's going to be if there's any Senate holdouts from the people who are on up for reelection or who are retiring from the Senate, so the Mitch McConnells of the world, if they decide that they don't like it and they have no political reason to vote yes, so they'll send a message that it's just not good. It's not a good bill. There is that possibility, however remote, that some of those senators who have the I don't care button anymore, if they're not running for reelection or if they're retiring, they just don't have the same kind of political calculus that the ones who
Hmm.
are up for reelection do. And so they might vote against it just because to send a clear message lying to the electorate's bad. There are some senators for sure, I think, that are going to take a serious pause of voting for this because of how many people are affected. It's never a good sign when a substantial number of your constituents are affected negatively by something and the benefits aren't being sold very well. They're going, oh, it's going to save us money. No, it's not. It's going to add trillions of dollars to the deficit.
Because of the tax cuts, right?
Yeah, it looks bad, right? They're giving more money to rich people and taking away money that's been allocated and appropriated for poor people. That's just at the end of the day, that's what's happening. But there's also other issues in there that are separate from the cuts to Medicaid. They're rolling back a bunch of these grants from do you remember the Green New Deal and the Inflation Reduction Act,
Yes.
where what they did in there was a bunch of grants for green energy jobs that benefits like a lot of states, right? Because they hammered out these agreements on a bipartisan basis for, in a lot of cases, of giving money to various states. What this bill is trying to do is roll back a lot of that money. And that might be a separate issue for some of these senators that they just don't want all this money that's been appropriated already that they were able to sell to their constituents. Look at all this money we're giving you for fixing things and creating jobs and all this other stuff. It's just going to go away. It's just going to vanish into the night. It's going to vanish into the mist of time. No more money. That's a tough sell. For if some of them ran on, look at what I did for you this last congressional session of bringing money and jobs back home, of bringing stability to all of us. That is a very tough sell. But I don't know. It's going to be complicated because it's doing all sorts of things that are good, like the changing of certain tax credits, the child tax credit, and a bunch of other stuff that it has some positive benefits, but you take the good with the bad. It's tricky, right? So Trump isn't a lame duck president yet. He still is in that sort of window of time where he has the most political capital and he can actually push things along and exert a certain degree of political pressure that makes it not the best idea to go against whatever he's saying needs to happen. I don't know that it would surprise me, but I would be interested to see if Trump threatens a veto if there are actually if the cuts to Medicaid stay in, because he did say no cuts to Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, and these are cuts.
Hmm.
But I don't know. There is a certain level of duplicity involved with
Yeah,
everything Trump says and does.
I just imagine him saying it's a big beautiful bill. That's what everybody says about it, regardless of what the I would imagine that he would just say, "Oh, look, I got a bill."
Yeah,
Um,
but they also spin this tale. So Mike Johnson's trying to spin this tale that it's not cuts to Medicaid, it's just getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse, which is
oh,
whatever
right.
they say it is, right? Oh, it's wasteful that people who need healthcare but are able-bodied are getting it. So let's make sure that able-bodied people, whatever that means, because their definition is very broad, don't get the Medicaid and they have work requirements. This goes back to that conversation we had about the assumption built into work requirements that there's work available for everyone who wants it and that the employers will hire those people for those who need to seek work with those work requirements.
Yes, the chilling effect.
Yeah, that's not guaranteed at all. That employers may post jobs, but it's quite possible that a lot of these people who are on Medicaid are just not the kinds of employees that these employers are looking for. What happens when you're kicked off of Medicaid and you don't have the ability to get a job for whatever reason because there's no guaranteed job in the country? Do you just what suffer? Do you get sick? Do you go to I guess the emergency room, right, is the next step because of Impala. That the emergency rooms have to see people regardless of their ability to pay, right? So you're just going to get tons of people going to the emergency room, even more than we see now. That seems to be what the ultimate emergency brake is or whatever. But there's just a huge problem in that. If you don't have access to preventive care or to medicine to stop a bad problem from becoming worse, then the emergency rooms can only treat like the end result of symptoms, like the very sick and the very ill. But that it doesn't stop someone with cancer from detecting it early and treating it. It doesn't save someone who might be in like slow heart failure from getting help or like liver disease. the country is going backwards, right? We know there's a problem. We have a way to address the problem. It's maybe not the best way, but it is a way more than the alternative, which is not addressing it at all or addressing it way too late. But the one
Mhm.
other issue is actually rural hospitals. When we're talking about something like the emergency room, right, you have to go to a hospital that has an emergency room to go to the emergency room, right? And rural hospitals are propped up by Medicaid funding. So if you take away a substantial amount of their funding, a lot of those rural hospitals are going to really struggle and some may close, right? Because what's keeping them going is Medicaid, straight up.
If there is an opportunity for Democrats in this, where does it lie? Do you think it lies, if I can infer based on what you've said, in saying these are cuts to Medicaid and they said there would not be cuts to Medicaid, or does it lie somewhere else?
Oh no, that's the very simple one is that Trump's on record saying unambiguously no cuts to Medicaid, no cuts to Medicare, no cuts to Social Security. 100%, if you take away the resources that are keeping hospitals going in certain parts of the country, then it is effectively a cut to all three of those, right? It doesn't matter how much money you have if you can't get access to healthcare, right? You can have insurance, but if you can't actually go to a hospital or a treatment center, good luck. Any cut to existing health facilities or existing medical personnel anywhere in the country is effectively a cut to access to medical care in the country, which means that it's a sort of subtle end run around cutting Medicaid, right? Because if you have less hospitals, you have less money going out the door to those hospitals, which means that you appropriate less money to Medicaid and Medicare in particular. Does that make sense? If you have less of a need, then you
Mm-hmm.
effectively are reducing it anyways. That's the same issue with the Social Security thing where it's a benefit cut. If all the people who could be getting Social Security aren't, because they're firing the staff from Social Security offices and they're reducing the number of offices that exist, and they're implementing requirements that you have to go in person and you have to make an
Yeah.
appointment, right,
Hmm.
with an employee. But if there's not
Right.
enough employees and there's not enough offices, then you create serious
Right.
impediments to people actually getting access to what you said you weren't going to cut. And so
Yeah.
that's the issue. Here's the deal: the Democrats, they can win because the amount of people affected is tens of millions of people. It's not some small number. It's like a third of the country, if not more. And those, they all
Mm-hmm.
vote, right? Old people vote more than anyone else. And there's plenty of old people who are on both Medicaid and Medicare, although
Yeah.
a lot are on Medicare. But it's not some imaginary vacuum where, oh, we'll implement all these cuts and no one will suffer. Oh, no, a lot of people will suffer. They will lose access
Yeah.
to all sorts of things. Democrats have a way in there where they're saying they're lying straight to your face. If you thought that Trump was going to protect you, he's not. The Republicans are either lying to Trump or themselves and just run ads nonstop on that, where you just have Trump saying, "Oh, we're not going to cut Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security at all," and then you just show all the cuts all across
Right.
the board. I think they can win there. It's a simple mess. Everyone understands it.
You asked if I understood, and so if I can rephrase to see if I do understand. If there is a reduction in input, really, unto Medicaid, it is a cut, regardless of whether it has been portrayed as a reduced need. For it can be engineered to be presented as a reduction of need if, for example, people can't call Social Security because it's too long a wait on the phone or they have to go in person. This can be shown as a reduction in need. Because trickery like this is possible, we cannot trust that something is a reduction in need, and we have to judge based on the numbers. Is that what you mean there?
Yeah.
Would you say?
So put it this way: if we already know there's an existing need, if that number goes down in any significant way, then it's a cut because we already know that there's an existing population that's receiving these benefits. Okay. So it's not like suddenly all these people got healthy all of a sudden. There's no universe where thousands or tens of thousands or millions of people on Medicaid all of a sudden stop. So there are exceptions, right?
They're not all suddenly gonna Forrest Gump drop their crutches and walk without aid. Yeah.
There are exceptions. So when the government gave out those checks for the pandemic for COVID, technically anybody who received it, like there's strict asset requirements for Medicaid and a couple of these others that in some places when they received a certain amount of money, I think that they were possibly kicked off, but there were exceptions that were put in place. Remember we talked about this where there were millions of people who were suddenly became qualified for Medicaid because of COVID, and then right before the election they were all kicked off all at once, and so they all felt it really badly, right? Because they had access to medical care and then they lost access to medical care. Same deal here, that you've got all these people who have access to Medicaid now, and these cuts by removing the hospitals, by removing the money, by removing changing the work requirements are cuts, right? They're strict cuts. It's just the way it goes because we know there's an
Hmm.
existing population that needs access to these things, and the circumstances haven't changed for that population. There's no real way around that. And it is
Yep.
trickery, right? Because it's statistics. They just go, oh, there's less of a need once you kick thousands, if not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands off the rolls for whatever convoluted reason they come up with, if it's the work requirements or if it's some other change in the numbers, suddenly they can go, let's stop giving states all this money because not enough people qualify. It's how any budget works, right? That they've allocated a certain amount for a certain number of people. And if they come up with a way to take the amount of people off the list, less money needs to go.
As they say, for pardon my French, but in this case I think it's warranted. There's lies, damn lies, and statistics. You heard that one.
The statistics are the lie they're presenting that there's
Yeah.
enough work available for everybody who wants to work or needs to work or is required to work that will pay them enough that they wouldn't need Medicaid. That's the big issue. If they implement work requirements, but they don't actually implement a system that subsidizes access to insurance or medical care, because remember, they're trying to also change Obamacare significantly, is that if you put in a system where the people who would otherwise qualify for Medicaid aren't, then you're creating a greater demand for emergency rooms, but removing the way to fund those emergency rooms. So it is absolutely a cut. It's terrible. This bill is awful. There's just this weird cognitive dissonance. We're like, we're not cutting Medicaid. Yes, you are. We're not cutting Medicare and Social Security. Yes, you are. Yes, they are.
We'll see you next week here on Mondays with Mike.